The latest Republican anti-voting rights bill is on its way to the governor's desk in Florida. The Republican governor there, Ron DeSantis, says, of course, he will sign the bill. It is a bill that is even more draconian than the hugely controversial anti-voting rights law enacted by Georgia Republicans just a few weeks ago. The Florida bill cuts early voting. It cuts voting drop boxes. It makes it harder to vote by mail. But as this bill is about to be signed into law, Republicans in Florida are realizing they might be in a little bit of an oops situation here, because these restrictions that they're imposing on voting aren't only going to hit Democratic-leaning voters, they're also accidentally going to hit their own. As I mentioned, one of the things they're making harder to do in Florida is voting by mail. Mail-in voting is incredibly popular among Republican voters in Florida. The Republican Party in Florida for decades has promoted and invested in getting Republican voters to cast their votes by mail. Republican legislators have again and again passed legislation in the past to make it easier to vote by mail, because that's kind of the Republican way of voting in Florida. That's how they've been pushing Republican voters to vote. You may have noticed that Republicans have done really well in Florida elections recently, including the one last November that was supposedly so awash in mail ballot voter fraud. We need all of these new restrictive voting laws. Well, lots of people mailed in ballots. Lots of Republicans mailed in ballots. Republicans have done really well with mail-in voting. But apparently, as they were rushing this new voter suppression bill through the legislature, Florida lawmakers overlooked the fact that they might be suppressing the wrong votes. They might be suppressing the votes of their own supporters. Amy Gardner has a remarkable report in the Washington Post today that as the bill was being debated in the Florida legislature, this is incredible, quote, some Republicans privately expressed worry that it could further undercut the party's ability to encourage mail voting, particularly among military voters and the elderly, who overwhelmingly use that method to cast their ballots. One former state party official said some Republicans briefly discussed whether lawmakers could exempt those two groups, military voters and the elderly, from the new mail voting rules. According to this former Republican official, quote, key lawmakers said, you can't do that. It would raise equal protection problems. He added, quote, now the damage is done. Now you'll have military personnel who might not think they have to request a ballot, and so they won't get it. We've got senior voters who have health concerns or just don't want to go out. They might not know the law has changed. They might not get a ballot because they are not engaged. Republicans have accidentally passed a whole bunch of new restrictions on voting that are on their way to the governor's desk that include the ways that Republican voters most like to vote in Florida, and that the Republican Party itself has invested millions of dollars and decades in trying to encourage among their own voters. On the way toward passing this thing, they reportedly tried to exclude from the new law just the slivers of voters who are most likely to vote Republican in Florida using these methods that they are now restricting. The technical term for this is oops. Joining us now is Washington Post national political reporter Amy Gardner. Ms. Gardner, it's really nice to have you here. Thank you for taking the time tonight.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Rachel.
What is the extent of the regret among Florida Republicans as they realize that these voting restrictions might cut into something that they've worked for decades to build support for among their most loyal voters?
It's pretty extensive. I mean, it's been 40 years in the making. Republicans had their first huge absentee ballot victory back in 1988 in a U.S. Senate race where the Democrat was ahead when everyone went to sleep on election night, and the Republican won 2 days later. And that's happened over and over again in Florida. And it's because of this incredible program that the Republican Party has built over those decades to teach elderly voters in particular, also military voters, how easy it is to vote by mail, and to keep coming back at them again and again and reminding them to do so. There's an amazing, I think, illustrative story that I wrote about in the story this morning, where a Democratic consultant, Steve Schale, who was the guy who ran Obama's campaign in 2008 in Florida, where every time President Trump tweeted last year about how crooked absentee balloting is or mail balloting is, he'd get a text from a Republican operative buddy, sending him like an eye roll emoji or, special characters meaning, swear words, because they were so upset at the damage that President Trump was doing to this method of voting that was so important to the Republican Party. I don't think we know how it will affect things going forward because we had this extraordinary year where President Trump was on the ballot and he's extraordinary as a candidate, and where we had a pandemic, which was, of course, extraordinary. But if things snap back to the mean, where more Republicans vote by mail than Democrats in a place like Florida, then these new provisions in this law could curtail that party more.
Do they have options? I mean, short of convincing Governor DeSantis to not sign the bill, trying to start over again to amend the bill to try to protect these forms of voting that they've promoted and that their voters like so much. Do they have any options, or is this essentially baked and they now have to just figure out how they're going to live with the consequences?
It's definitely baked. Ron DeSantis went on Fox News last week right after the bill passed and said, quote unquote, of course, I'm going to sign the bill into law. I think the passage of this bill reflects the bind that lots of Republicans in lots of state houses are in around the country right now, which is that they're under tremendous pressure to show their loyalty to President Trump and to his that the election was stolen, even though many of them privately believe that Joe Biden won the election fairly. And so there's this huge pressure to pass these laws that in a lot of cases, both Republicans and Democrats describe as a solution without a problem. You know, states like Florida, where even DeSantis widely hailed the 2020 election as the gold standard for election administration in America. So I don't think there's regret about doing what they felt they had to do by passing the bill. They felt they had to please their constituents, to please the audience of one, meaning President Trump. But I do think that going forward, there are going to be strategies on how to make sure that they continue or increase the education for their voters on how to vote by mail and how to navigate these new rules. I think you're going to see a lot of political consultants who do mail make a lot of money in the next couple of cycles because they're going to be sending a lot of mail to Republican voters telling them how to use these new laws.
Yeah, even in the case of a sort of political own goal, right? There will be ways that this will be turned into at least a money-making opportunity for the consultant class. Amy Gardner, Washington Post national political reporter. Thank you so much for great reporting on this, great and colorful reporting on this, and thanks for helping us understand it tonight.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.